Some of you, we do have some CLIL teachers joining us this morning, today. And some of you, although you appear to know what it is, you're not currently teaching CLIL. So in this webinar, it's basically we're going to be thinking about what CLIL is. We're going to think about CLIL in the classroom. What does that look like in the classroom? We're going to consider different CLIL tasks, and then we're going to finish off by looking at some benefits of CLIL. So basically, it's just a tip of the iceberg of what teaching CLIL is. Now, I will try to read the comments in the chat box. So I might not be able to read all of your comments, but I will definitely try. So to begin with, I thought we could start with the CLIL quiz. Okay, so in this CLIL quiz, we have 4 questions. And after each question, all I'd like you to do is to type your answers in the chat box. And I see some of you already are saying, answering the very first question. And the first question is, what does the acronym CLIL stand for? And indeed it does. It stands for Content and Language Integrated Learning. Wonderful, great. So Content and Language Integrated Learning. What is that exactly? Okay, so what is content and language integrated learning? So the next question, I have 3 sentences, and I do believe we have another poll here. So which sentence best defines CLIL? Which sentence best defines CLIL? It is the subject matter. A, it is subject matter, which determines the language needed to learn. B, language is the most important factor and content is fitted around it. C, language and content have the same importance. So I will just give you a moment. Oh, it's pretty much the same. So it's okay. All right. So we'll end the poll now, and well done. Yes, the correct answer, which 59% of you got, is language and content have the same importance. So the focus is not only on content, but also on language. Here we have a definition of what CLIL is. So according to the European Commission, content and language integrated learning in which pupils learn a subject through the medium of a foreign language. But I think this seems a little bit simple. Why? Because it doesn't really tell us to what extent or to what level learners learn a subject through the foreign language. And it doesn't really give us any reasons at all for doing CLIL. So why should we consider incorporating CLIL lessons into our courses? Here's another definition, which is from David Marsh, who created the term CLIL. So this definition, CLIL refers to situations where subjects or parts of subjects are taught through a foreign language with dual focused aims, namely the learning of content and the simultaneous learning of a foreign language. So this definition gives us much more detailed description. And I think this definition is useful because it does highlight the educational aims of CLIL. So through CLIL type practice, students can learn content whilst at the same time learning a foreign language, be that English or French or whichever foreign language. So I think this is a much better definition. However, I sometimes find that the problem with definitions, especially when it comes to educational approaches, is that they do tend to be rather abstract and not practical. And it can be sometimes hard for us to imagine what does this actually look like in practice in our classrooms? And this is what we're going to have a look at in a little bit more detail later on in the webinar. So let's move on to the next question. Which approach or approaches does CLIL draw on more? A, lexical, B, communicative, C, humanistic, or D, content-based teaching? So if you'd like to type in the chat box, A, B, C, or D, which approach or approaches? D, D, D. Hi, D. D. Okay, so yes, also D because we're thinking it's the content. Based on the material directly related to the content, to the subject of the class. But both content and language are explored in a CLIL lesson. So a CLIL approach also aims to guide language and also therefore includes aspects of lexical, communicative, and humanistic approaches from ELT. So it uses and incorporates all of these approaches in the lesson. So CLIL has three main principles. And here are the three main principles. But what I've done, I've taken out keywords, okay? So I'd like to see if you can guess what the keywords are. So in the first principle, language is used to as well as So I've given you the first letter. So what do you think the missing words are in the first? Learn, yes, Roja Priya, well done, yes. Learn, language is used to learn as well as create, yes. Content, communicate, yes. So language is used to learn as well as communicate. So they're using, they're learning about the subject, they're learning through the language. What about number two? The S determines the language input. Can you guess what the missing word is? Because it's all coming in the chat box. So yes, learn and communicate. There's about a 15-second delay between me asking the question and me seeing your answers in the chat box. Subject, yes. The subject determines the language input. So depending on the subject, the content, then the language needed in order to communicate and to learn about that subject. So the subject determines what the input of the language is. And the third one, the focus is not only on language, not only on content, each is, what could the last one be? Each is, so it's not only on language, not only on content, independent intent. Well done. I couldn't catch your name. Who got the right answer? Yes, the focus is not only on language, not only on content. Each of them, each is interlinked. So in a CLIL lesson, there will be moments will be focused on language, on content. Throughout the lesson, both are interlinked. Okay, so we're coming now to question number 5. Which is seen as secondary in a CLIL lesson? Accuracy or fluency? Which is seen as secondary? Yes. Accuracy. Focus is fluency. So accuracy is actually secondary. Focus in CLIL lessons is on fluency. One of the key principles of CLIL is that fluency is more important than accuracy. The nature of CLIL lessons means that the students will produce and be exposed to a wide range of language. So the focus is firmly on communication, and accuracy, of course, comes with time. And as we all know, making mistakes is a natural process in language learning. Language doesn't have to be accurate to be communicative. And in CLIL lessons, CLIL exposes our learners to situations which are calling for genuine communication. So the focus is very, very much on fluency and on communication. Okay, question number 5. What are the 4 C's which underpin CLIL? So what are the 4 C's? And each one of the 4 C's I've represented here on the slide in these 4 pictures to help you. So the 4 C's of CLIL, the framework which underpins CLIL lessons. Content, yes, as one. Communication. Content, culture. Okay, we've got collaboration, creativity, which are skills that are involved included definitely in CLIL lessons. Oh, going so quickly, it's very difficult for me to read. So content, yes, I think you've got them all. So the 4 C's, this framework developed by Do Coyle. Now, this was developed in 1999, so about 20 years ago. Content, cognition, communication, and culture. But what do we mean exactly by this? So the content is, of course, the subject matter, integrating content from across the curriculum, from other subject areas. We then have cognition, which is the learning and thinking processes. So looking at developing cognitive and thinking skills, engaging our learners through higher order thinking. And communication, language learning and processing, using language to learn, mediate ideas, communicate their thoughts and their values, while also learning to use language. And last but definitely not least, culture, developing intercultural understanding and global citizenship. So interpreting and understanding the significance of content and language, understanding our students, understanding themselves and other cultures, and really working to becoming global citizens. Okay, so what have we seen up to now? So these are the 4 areas we've looked at. We've looked at what a definition of CLIL is. We've looked at the 3 CLIL principles. We've considered CLIL approaches and a CLIL lesson, and we've looked at what the 4 C's of the CLIL lessons are, the 4 C's framework which underpins a CLIL lesson. But what does this all look like in the classroom? What does it look like for us in the classroom? Thinking about language now, I'd like you to think about language in CLIL classes. So we know in CLIL classes, the focus is both on language and on the subject, on content. What type of language is needed? Okay, I'm going to show you 3 questions now, which I just want you to think about. Okay, so I'm going to show you 3 questions. And I'd just like you to think about these questions. Think about when you're teaching in your classes, what type of questions do we ask? What kind of answers do we expect? And how long do we give students before expecting an answer? So these questions, I just want you to think, what type of questions do we ask? What kind of answers do we expect? How long do we give our students before expecting an answer? I think that sometimes I've asked questions to my students and I've been surprised by the answers that they've given me. They've given me answers that I wasn't expecting. And at the beginning, I would think, oh, maybe it's because my students don't have enough language level, or they lack a language knowledge in order to answer the questions that I was asking. But on reflection, I think sometimes the questions I wasn't asking the correct question. So moving on to the third one, how long do we give students before expecting an answer? Well, the last research, I'd love to ask you in the chat, how long do we give students before expecting an answer? Yes, I can see something. How long do you think we give before expecting an answer? 2 minutes. Okay, 2 minutes. That's quite a long time. Well, research, we've had 2 minutes come up there. 5 seconds, okay. 30 seconds, 1 minute. Well, the latest research has said, before moving, I've moved on to, has said that on average, 0.9 seconds. We give our students 0.9 seconds before we expect an answer from them. So, one way to help us think about language, one way to help us think about the language that we're using and are teaching in the classroom and our students' subsequent learning is by using Bloom's taxonomy. So maybe some of you are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's revised critical thinking taxonomy is a great place to start when thinking about the type of questions we ask our students. It's a hierarchical ordering of these cognitive skills. So just to recap, for some of you that may are not so familiar with Bloom's revised taxonomy, there are 6 levels of thinking in Bloom's taxonomy, in Bloom's model. So we have skills towards the bottom, which are simpler. We can see at the bottom it says lower order thinking skills. These are simpler skills, and towards the top it works up towards more complex. So although the model is hierarchical, so it goes from simpler to more complex skills, all of the skills are important. Yes, I can see some of you are very familiar as well with Bloom's revised taxonomy. So the bottom 3 skills, as I've seen in the chat box, are known as LOTS, so thinking lower order thinking skills. So the first level is remembering. For example, we could ask our students to remember a poem in English. The second level then moves up to understanding, which could be asking our students to summarize or answer comprehension questions to a story or a text. And as we move up the taxonomy to the top 3 skills, this is where we're looking at higher order thinking skills. The cognitive demands on our students require deeper thinking. So good critical thinking involves all of these skills working together. So when we need to think about what type of questions we are asking our students, we can ask, are we also including HOT, so higher order thinking skills, into our teaching? Are we pushing our students to deeper thinking? So thinking about the questions, we're thinking about questions we're asking our students in class. I have another question for you. Okay. This is following. So how long do you give your students before expecting an answer? I'd really like you to think about this, because when I was first asked this question years ago by one of my trainers training me to teach, I said, I'm sure I give my students at least a minute before I ask them, I expect an answer from them. However, when I was videoed, I had a class, I was teaching videoed, and when I watched myself teaching, which was very difficult to do, but I learned so much, I realized that I didn't give my students so much time. So I can hear 5 seconds, yes, 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that's a long time. So I'd just like you to bear this question in mind, because I'm going to show you now. I'm going to show you now 6 questions, and these questions are about trees. Okay, so this is the next. I'd like you to look at these 6 questions. If you have a pen or a pencil by you, I'd like you to look at these 6 questions, and I'd like you to note down in order. You can see I've numbered them 1 to 6, and I'd like you to take a look at them and just note down which questions you think, and I've just seen some of you put in the chat, depends on the question. Yes, I'd like you to note down which of these 6 questions you think require more time. So if you want to write in order, for example, if you think question number 3 requires the least amount of wait time, then put down number 3 and then put them in order. So 3, 2, depending on which ones you think. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a moment to think about how much wait time, so how much in time, which of these questions need more wait time, which of these questions need less wait time. Is the most. 2, 4, 3, 6 seconds. Thank you. Okay, they'll go very fast in the chat box, so it's a little bit difficult for me to catch them all. Well, if we think about these questions and we think about Bloom's taxonomy, we could say that the first question that requires the least amount of wait time is, what is this? It's a simple question. We're asking, asking our students to name something. So the next one after 2, I think some of you, yes, have got it. So would be 5. So we're now asking them to do a little bit more. What do we use it for? So here we're asking them what, not only to know what it is, but to understand what it's used for. So then the next question, which would need a little bit more wait time, would be, how do you use it? So we've moved from understanding to, okay, now not only do they need to understand what it is, know what it is, understand what it's used for, but how to apply it. The next question would be 6. Yes, Bidisha, I think you've got it right. Yes, what is the function of each part of a tree? So now they have to start analyzing. Question 3, is a tree the best thing to use for what we use it for? And finally, question 1 requires the most cognitive skills. What other things could you use a tree for? Here, we're asking our students to create, and this would mean that we need to give our students, right at the top of Bloom's taxonomy, a lot more time before we expect them to answer or to produce. So this idea of wait time that we've been talking about, what do we mean by wait time? The time we take before we expect a response from our learners. So returning to that point that we've just made now, the higher order thinking questions will require much more wait time than the lower order thinking skills. And why is it so important that we think about this in our classes? Why is it so important that we make sure that we are giving our students enough time to answer? Well, our learners will give longer answers. If we're aware of the time we're giving them, our learners will be able to answer the questions, especially with the higher order thinking skills, the more cognitively demanding questions. If we give them time to think, they're more likely to give us longer answers and avoid short answers. They become more involved and they have more time to listen to others in the class. Opportunity for alternative explanations are given, and there's a less chance of no response. One one strategy I used to use with my students in class, I would ask the question if I was aware that this was a question that did require them to really think, a higher order thinking skill, a more cognitively demanding question. I would ask the question, but I would tell my students to think. I'd say to them, I'm just going to ask you the question, and all I'd like you to do now is think about the answer. So I'd ask the question first, tell my students to think, give them time to think, then I would ask the question again. I'd ask the same question again. And then before asking them to answer in open class, I would either, depending on the number of students in the class, I would ask them in pairs or in groups to share their answers, and then elicit from the whole class. So making sure that I was giving the students enough time to process and provide a good quality answer. So we're thinking about asking the right questions. So thinking about type of questions we could ask and how cognitively demanding. We could do a completely new separate webinar, which is specifically looking at asking the right questions. And I have now another question for you. If we look here, asking the right questions, I have a sentence. Can you guess, on average, teachers ask how many questions a day? Can you fill in the blank? So on average, how many questions do you think teachers ask a day? 20, 5 to 6 in one day. 200, also 200, 100, many, lots of questions. Yes. I think as teachers, we become question machines sometimes. Okay, see lots of numbers, 300. Yes, one of you got it, definitely. On average, teachers ask between 300 and 400 questions a day, according to the latest research. But out of these 300 questions, which is incredible, so many, many questions, out of these 300 questions, how many of them are good quality questions? How many of them really work in the classroom? So questions are, of course, a natural feature of communication, and also one of the most important tools we have at our disposal as teachers. So we're going to have a look at different questions we can ask our students. I want you to take a look at this photo, and I want you now to type, what type of questions could we ask our students, our learners, about this photo? What types of questions could we ask our learners? Show them this photo. What types of questions? Have a look. What types of questions could we ask our learners? Are they friends? Excellent, wonderful. Who are they? Okay, are they friends? Are the two boys friends? How many? Okay, so excellent questions, yes. In fact, those are wonderful questions. Normally we would probably ask, can you describe the picture? Who do you think they are? What kind of questions could we ask to more cognitively demanding questions? We can maybe ask them, who do you imagine took the photo? How does the photograph make you feel? So just by asking questions that we don't know the answer to, we're immediately asking more cognitively demanding questions, or which they have to think beyond the picture. I'm going to do here another activity with you. So this is a photo here. This is a photograph which I took, I can't remember how many years ago. I think it's about 5 Christmases ago, 5 winters ago, in the UK. It was December time, and there was a really, really very heavy snowfall. The temperatures dropped to -7. And I can remember, because I've never experienced so much called in my life. So what kind of questions? I use this with some of my students. What questions can you ask about this photo? So when I was thinking about asking my students questions about this photo, and I wanted to ask them more cognitively demanding questions, I thought about the senses. And each one of these pictures on the picture, so each one of these images, I should say, represents a question. So if we look at the top right-hand corner, the eye, the question might be, yes, what can you see? So if we look at the bottom, the ear, what can you hear? And you come up with these sentences, five questions, which are asking our students to think more, think beyond just the photo. What can you see? What can you hear? What can you smell? What can you touch? And what can you taste? Using the senses. And what I've done in class with this, depending, of course, on the topic, the content of the class as well. Here is a photo of when I was in the UK at winter time. You can develop this much further. You can ask your students to develop this into producing a text, for example. So by including these questions, these sensory questions, we can ask our students, developing our students' cognitive ability much further. Okay, moving on, because I know that we are short for time. I'm going to share some activity ideas. Maybe these ideas you could try out and adapt with some of your classes. I'm going to show you a picture. When you look at this picture, and I would like you to ask, what kind of tasks could you ask your students to do just from this picture? And at the bottom, we have the 6 levels from Bloom's taxonomy to help. I do believe that there's a handout that Alan will have uploaded to the webinar. So hopefully you'll be able to download a handout of Bloom's taxonomy. But for now, I'd like you, well done, recipe writing, naming the vegetables. Okay, so but if we're thinking about Bloom's taxonomy, going from lower order thinking skills to higher order thinking skills, we could ask our students to different tasks, depending on how much cognitive demand we want to give them. I have come up with, here I've created 5 tasks from this one image. So the first one, listing 6 fruits you can see, and then findings moves up to finding something which isn't a fruit or a vegetable. Number 3, group the foods. How many did you make? 4, can you grow these foods in your country? And then 5, creating a recipe from the food in the picture. So the cognitive skills are progressing from lower to higher order thinking skills. So if we're looking at listing 6 fruits, we're here asking our students to remember naming fruits, identifying them in the picture. Then we can ask them to compare, contrast, finding a fruit or a vegetable. And so we're developing our students' cognitive skills right up to the 5th task, which we're then asking them to create a recipe from the food in the picture. So this is something that involves creative thinking and which is a higher order thinking skills. So to help me create these tasks linked to this picture, I've used this, which is in the handout, I hope. At the end, I'll make sure that I'll ask Alan to have uploaded the handout. So I've used this, which can help you create a series of activities when you're working on critical thinking and on different topics. So it basically includes planning verbs for each level of Bloom's taxonomy, which helps us as teachers to create activities. I just showed you a picture of food. The topic would be food, and showed you ideas of how I asked my students first to list. So I looked in the remembering column and I saw, okay, listing. I can ask them to list the fruits they can see. The next step up, understanding. So I could ask them either to compare, explain, summarize, classify. I asked them to classify whether something was a fruit or a vegetable. And this is a great tool that can help us think about creating tasks for our students in our classes. Here I've got another example for a higher level class. Okay, so here's looking at the topic of cities. So this is a city. I'm not sure if you know where this is, if you know where this picture is. This picture is taken from, it's a photo of Madrid. So what could we ask our students to do here? Unfortunately, we don't have time, and I was like to ask you to think of writing at least 3 lower order and 3 higher order questions for your learners to answer, and which cognitive skills are developed. So I'm actually going to now show you here. So possible questions linked to the handout, which helps us develop those questions. If we're thinking of lots, what landscape features can you see? So we're just asking them to identify and remember, what is the climate like? Which sea is in the background, for example? So these are lower order thinking skills where we're asking our students to simply identify and remember aspects of a city, of a geography of a country. And if we move on to higher order thinking skills, why do you think there are lots of colorful buildings? Is this like the place where you live? Why? Why not? We're already asking them to here analyze and evaluate. If you were a town planner, what would you change and why? So these are ideas of how you can use the handout and apply it to tasks and create different tasks to try it with your students in classrooms. For very young learners, you can give homework ideas. They can be simple. It's just as simple as providing opportunities for learners to maintain and extend their learning out of the classroom. It's giving a new focus to homework. And we're still thinking about this idea of integrating and interlinking the content and the language. For example, you can give your students a maths challenge. How many footsteps from your front door to your bedroom? So the homework you're asking them to do is count the number of footsteps they have from their front door to their bedroom, for example, or from the kitchen to the bathroom, or what happens to the number when you take bigger steps. And practice writing these numbers at home. So you could give your students this as an extension of a homework, and they can do this at home and then bring it back to class. Also, ask them, are you taller or shorter than a door? Are you taller or shorter than an armchair? Or are you taller or shorter than the fridge? So these are simple activity ideas, this focusing on the subject of maths, and asking your students these simple questions to ask and answer and bring back to class. So this is the handout which I hope that we'll be able to upload, and which I used to develop those activity tasks linked to those different images. As I said, you have the 6 levels of Bloom's taxonomy, and then you have a whole list of verbs underneath linked to that level in the Bloom's taxonomy, which is a wonderful way and a great tool to help us as teachers create tasks for our students in the classroom. And now this has been a very quick dip into the world of teaching CLIL, but I would like to finish on just by outlining benefits of CLIL. There are many, but these are the 6 top benefits. It improves language competence and oral communication skills. The focus is on communication. So in CLIL classes, students are more focused on being able to communicate the ideas, their opinions, and not so worried about, am I using the specific correct grammar structure? It provides authentic and motivating use of language. It encourages our learners to use language to express their thoughts and their ideas and their feelings, which genuinely matter. As we've seen, it promotes cognitive flexibility by focusing on ways we can develop higher order thinking skills, asking our students to practice, observe, analyze, and apply. Point number 4, introduces a wider cultural context, and of course, then prepares for future studies and our students' working life. And one of the most important ones, it increases motivation and confidence in the language and subject as our students see how they're able to communicate their ideas and their opinions. So this brings us to the end of the webinar. I do believe I'm on time. And I want to thank you very much for listening. It's been a very quick, so I'm going to put my camera back on. It's been a very a quick dip into the world of teaching CLIL. So I hope that it has given you all some food for thought. I hope it's also given you maybe some ideas on how you can adapt activities in your classes and in your classroom contexts.
All right. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that excellent session. A lot of positive feedback coming through. People thought it was very interesting. One of the questions that came up that I think was a really good one from Zunaz. You can hear me, right, Andrea?
I can hear you. I can.
Okay, you look like you were panicking there.
No, I'm listening to the question.
Okay. Oh no, and this was from Zunaz. What age can someone start learning CLIL? I mean, what age do you think that it starts?
Oh, and I think you can incorporate CLIL lessons. Right, I'd say maybe upper primary. Here in Spain, we include CLIL lessons. Well, we include CLIL lessons right at the beginning of primary, but it's a very, very basic form, a very, very simple form of CLIL lessons. So we could include them right from first of primary, which is 6 years old here. 6 years and up, although in some of our materials, the Cambridge University First materials, you'll already see in some of our courses, there'll be CLIL lessons included in the first and second of primary.
Yeah, and I think I was really happy to see just the difference you really brought up of how, you know, CLIL is so much more than just content. I think that, you know, a lot of people really think CLIL means I'm teaching science or I'm teaching math, but I think, you know, there's so much more than that.
Definitely.
Deepa asked, you know, considering learning the English language, would EMI be a model of CLIL, or do you think it's something different, like English as a medium of instruction? This
is how I see CLIL and EMI. And maybe this is a very simplified version of seeing both these two different concepts. I think of CLIL as us language teachers. In a language classroom, we're now focusing on the content and we're teaching the subject matter through English. And I think of EMI much more in higher education, at university level, high school level, where teachers are teaching their subject teachers, their specific maths teachers, and they're teaching their subject through English. So this, for me, from what I've researched and what I've read, is a way of I understand the difference between when we're thinking about CLIL, we're thinking more about as language teachers. Today we're going to be focusing on a CLIL lesson, which means maybe looking at geography, but we are predominantly language teachers. And in English, in EMI, a much more higher education, university level, where there are subject-specific subject teachers who are teaching their subject through English. Would you agree, Alan?
Well, I mean, you know far more about this than I do. I mean, being a CLIL, that's why I asked you to do this. But I think that, you know, what you said there about, you know, just that emphasis on how much language is involved. I think it goes back to what you said about, you know, content is not more important than language, and language is not more in content. With CLIL,
it's very much interlinked. And talking to some CLIL teachers here in Spain, as a couple of years ago, I was giving a workshop in a school here, and I was talking to some teachers who were new to teaching CLIL, and one of the things that they mentioned to me, and they said that they found an enormous they found very encouraging and found exciting, is that when their students, when they were specifically putting together their CLIL lessons, they found that their students, when asked to carry out tasks which had a more of a CLIL focus, were less worried about making language mistakes, because the focus was on completing the task and communicating. And they found that as a very positive positive feedback from them, including CLIL, that the fact their students weren't worried about the accuracy, because the focus is on communication, on communicating their ideas. And as we all know, we will learn through making mistakes and communicating and trying, and not being frightened to try and make and try.
Yeah, fantastic. I've got one more question for you, and it's one from Amelia. And Amelia, yes, and she says that she finds that her students, you know, that they really have an especially hard time with the higher order thinking skills questions. You know, I think she's like a lot of us. They can do the lower order thinking skills, but once we get to the higher order thinking skills, do you have any tips or anything to kind of bridge?
It's interesting. It's gracious that, because, you know, in 45 minutes, I also wanted, and you know, Alan, because you were saying to me, Andrea, you're not going to have time. You're not going to have time. I wanted to include a section on supporting your CLIL lessons, because, of course, it's so important when we're creating the tasks. What kind of support can we provide our students in order to be able to carry out those tasks, especially, as Amelia says, when we're demanding much more cognitive demand of our students? We can, I always say, it's not bad to use L1, their native language, in the classroom. It can be used as an excellent resource if it's used correctly, providing lots of language support for our students, which could be sentence starters. It could also be specific rubrics that they need, including functional language that they'd need to carry out the tasks. You can give them glossaries. So there are different tools that you, and support that you can provide your students in order to carry out those more demanding tasks. And maybe we can have another webinar just focusing on that one day.
I'm sure they would love it. And if you could help me in the chat room, I think that we'll draw this part of your session to a close. But if you could help me, if you enjoyed Andrea's presentation. If you could type as we do here in Asia, clap, clap, clap.
Oh, okay, that's excellent.
Make sure that
Thank you very much for listening.
And I do have just some important information to share with the rest of you. And if you, even if this is your fourth webinar, pay attention, because a few things have changed. I'm just going to turn off my my video.
Should I turn my camera off too?
Please, just so we can see it real quick. So just some important follow-up information for all of you. In order for you to get your certificate, you will receive an email with a link to a survey in a few hours. It will come very quickly. If you haven't received it yet, it's coming soon. It's on the same automated system as this webinar. And you're also going to get the same link in a couple of minutes. I'm going to send it through this platform. It may ask you to accept a pop-up. This is a link to a feedback form, and filling in this feedback form will allow you to get your certificate. Please only fill in the survey one time. You're going to get the link and you're going to get the email. If you do it by link, you can just ignore the email. You don't have to do it 2 times. The survey only takes about 5 to 8 minutes. Actually, we can see how long it takes people to fill in the survey, and it's been taking people about 3 to 4 minutes. So it's very, very fast to do. So we would ask that you complete the survey within the next 2 hours.